Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Streamlining CMS Solution Adoption and Getting Value. I'm Melissa Wagner, the Product Marketing Manager for Arbortext at PTC, and I'm your host for today. We have a couple of special guests today who will be presenting, Joe Russo from Intuitive Surgical and Scott Youngblom from Oberon Technologies. This session will be 45 minutes with Q&A at the end. Also, this webinar will be recorded and posted on YouTube. So if you have any questions, feel free to enter them at any time, and we will be holding questions to the end. If we cannot get to your question, that's okay. We will get a report, and we will reach you offline if we run out of time. So with that, I'd like to go and get started and kick things off. Joe, do you want to go ahead and take it away?
Thank you much, Melissa. Morning, everyone. This is Joe Russo, information architect, tools person, writer, editor, and all-around dude at Intuitive Surgical. I have about 15 plus years experience in the field and about 4 years at Intuitive.
We do a variety of different things. I head up the business development group here globally, and we were involved with supporting Joe and his initiative.
All right. And let me start by just giving you a quick introduction to who we are and what we do. Our flagship product is the DaVinci System. It's a minimally invasive, robotic-assisted surgery system. This is a picture of one of our older systems just to give you an idea of how the thing works. On the left, you can see, on the right, we have what we call the patient cart. It's a system that has 4 arms on it, which are attached to camera and 3 other instruments, up to 3 other instruments that are then poked into the patient, up to 2 surgeon consoles where surgeons can sit and manipulate the instruments, and then a vision cart where the process can be monitored by other people in the room, and the main components of the system are housed. And I won't bore you with a YouTube video right now, but when you have a chance, go out and Google DaVinci and Grape and take a look at this video. It's a great introduction to the system and showing the precision that this works. Peeling a skin off of a grape and then sewing it back on. And then just a quick introduction to how we tick, what keeps us moving. Scott, I'll let you talk about yourself and Oberon.
Okay, thanks. So Oberon Technologies is a system integrator and consultation organization providing support for companies in what we call 4 disciplines: the authoring of information, the content management and storage and managing of those assets, the publishing side, and then the delivery side. And on top of all of those tools and implementations of those tools, we also have a variety of consultants that support ancillary things needed in an implementation, like pre-planning workshops, conversion, migration plans, support on the translation of the different languages, and then strategy and strategic direction planning as well. So kind of an end-to-end plethora of services that we can provide to organizations. And with Intuitive, we actually did all of that and supported them in all of those aspects. So we're headquartered in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but we work in a variety of industries, from med device to manufacturing to finance to aerospace and so forth. Joe?
Thanks, Scott. So we want to talk about our journey to move our documents and our documentation into a CMS and into a data-supported CMS, and talk about why we wanted to do it in the first place and what the process was like, and finally what some of our results were, our lessons learned, and where we want to go with this in the future. The biggest problem with our existing system, our previous system, was that our docs were monolithic. Each doc was an object unto its own. If it was a Word file, if it was a FrameMaker file, it was one individual file on its own. If we created a new version of the document, we just copied and saved and started making changes again. If we had two systems that were similar, or if we were introducing a new system, we would take the old system user manual, copy, save, and start editing, and these things lived on their own with no interaction with each other, no reuse throughout the docs. We used styling more than structure. We used unstructured frame for our documents. And this resulted in look and style creep over time where things slightly changed, or different documents having a completely different look and feel depending on the document type. So we had little or no chance to do reuse. If we did, it was something like grabbing a graphic and sharing it among folders. And this also resulted in a high translation cost, because if we created a new version of a manual and made only maybe 10% changes in the doc, we still had to send the entire file out for translation and DTP. So we had a lot that we wanted to get past. Our goals with going to a CMS and going to a data solution, topic-based writing, was topics, not tomes. We wanted to be writing for reuse. Reuse instead of repeating, creating style sheets that could be applied across documents to keep a consistent look and feel, and to improve the translation workflow. Also, once we have topic-based writing, we have a bag full of Legos. We have pieces that we can play with. We can move them around. We can output them in different ways. We can do web-based content, embedded help, direct neural implant in the back of the skull. Anything is possible at this point. And the road to get from here to there. And Scott, I'd like to have you talk about this a little bit, please.
Sure, no worries. One of the things that we, when we first engaged with Intuitive, and first of all, Intuitive's a very progressive organization. Their products are state-of-the-art. They wanted to get their information into that reusable and fluid format. And in order to do this in a regulated environment like Intuitive Surgical, because they're considered a med device organization, the government puts a lot of processes and procedures and things that you have to put in place. So for the beginning of this project, we ended up doing quite a bit of planning and some work up front in preparation of actually an implementation. And we, because of that, we uncovered where their business challenges were, from high translation costs, inconsistent brandings. The writers were doing several manual steps using WYSIWYG tools as opposed to a more of an automated authoring system. And the end result was they wanted to give the information to their internal and external consumers in a more dynamic way. PDFs are a mandate within the med device, but as technology continues to progress, going to the digital world is a direction that med device organizations are headed. We did quite a few different analysis and assessments and eventually built out a roadmap for them. They had a lot of good expertise in-house from XML and DITA experts, and we built kind of cross-functional teams in order to work through the different strategies. So it wasn't just the technical publications group that we got involved. We had groups that were also from training there, groups that would take the content and they wanted to feed their information to these other groups within Intuitive, as well as getting input from their engineering department to help build the documentation. So we involved kind of a collaboration, functional cross-functional teams during these analysis and processes and planning sessions, which also made the implementation go very smoothly because of that. Joe?
Thanks, Scott. And so let's get into kind of the nitty-gritty of what we did. And, again, I think one of the key things was partnering with experts, knowing that there were people who have done this before, who know what some of the roadblocks will be, what some of the obstacles will be, and help us on the journey along the way. And I think partnering with Oberon provided that for us to really be able to know what challenges we were going to be facing and how to address those, how to look at those as we went along. Certainly hiring someone like me on the staff helped. I think coming in with some experience, and building off of the experience that is already in the organization, identifying it and finding those expertise that people have and building up that expertise to move forward with the progress. A big part of doing a conversion like this is the analysis. What are we going to be converting, when, how, what do we want it to look like at the end? And identifying major changes that are going to come along the way. As we convert, what are our options for unifying style, for improving language? So doing an analysis and on a multifaceted analysis as the process goes along. And again, as always, getting people involved. There's a lot of resources within your organization. There's a lot of expertise that can be used, and the more interdepartmental, intergroup work that you can do, the better the final outcome will be on it, and the better the acceptance will be. Because we don't work in bubbles. We produce the documentation, but we need to get the information from someplace. There's a whole process that goes on after us to approve the doc, to distribute the docs, and knowing that everyone is involved and knows what's happening so they're not suddenly surprised with a PDF that looks very different than something they'd ever seen before. Scott, did you have anything to add on this one?
No, I think, I'll just say one comment here. You can't downplay the importance of planning. When we got done with the planning session and we moved into the implementation of the actual solution, because the planning was very well thought through and done with all these cross-departmental groups involved, during the implementation, we actually came in about 20 to 30% less than what was budgeted for. And I think that had a lot to do with the education and the planning up front, which in the long run actually saved them some implementation costs down the road. Other than that, Joe, that's it.
Sounds good, thanks. But I will let you continue on with this one for a bit.
Oh, yeah, good point. So we did an analysis workshop, and, you know, we did planning, a variety of things. I've already kind of mentioned we got other stakeholders involved, but the actual planning part were things such as like identifying the document types that would be initially deployed. We have a process here where we try to do things in 30, 60, 90-day increments because organizations want to see, especially upper management, want to see return on investments and ROI quicker and faster. And so, you know, we identified various product lines, document types, what kind of conversion strategies they might need, identified the different formats they wanted to target to begin with, things of that nature. Also, we talk a lot about processes because once you go from a manual process to a more automated process, there's change management involved. And so we identified different roles and things that people may want to move to as opposed to, as an example, for those, you know, most people who understand the XML, there's formatting. So you don't need to format as much. You let the system do that. So it allowed for additional time and resources to potentially do other aspects of an implementation and maintenance of that system. So all of that was all part of the planning. We also created conversion tools that allowed them to map and legacy content, typically styles, from their legacy content directly into a structured markup along with attributes. And then intuitive, as their writers, part of their process of going from unstructured writing to writing, they actually use the tools then for cleanup, which cleanup of the content, by which they actually help them get familiar with the authoring environment. So this was all part of the what I'd say before they went into production with the actual new structured content system. So all of this was done up front.
And I realized too, as we were talking about the environment and tools, we didn't mention before, but the CMS that we're using is Windchill. The authoring tool is ArborText. And a big part of this that's also not here is the training that we did to get writers used to new tools. And a bit of the paradigm shift of going from owning a book solely and writing it completely themselves and deciding formatting to now working in an environment where they might only write 80% of the topics in a doc, or they might share writing with half-half with another writer, or pull in topics that were written by someone they've never met, and having no control or very little control over styling and layout. And the training and encouragement that went on with that. As I've mentioned here, we have two sets of documentation that we decided to start with. The first are our field service manuals. These are documents that teach field engineers or describe to field engineers how to replace parts, repair parts, check connectivity, and they're really well written for data, for modularization. For example, if I want to replace the heat sink on the chip in my laptop, I have to power it down, remove the back cover, remove the memory board, remove the old heatsink, put the new one in, and then step myself back out, turn on the system, test it to make sure everything's okay. Now, if I were to replace the chip itself, I do all of those steps, including removing the heatsink, then replace the chip, and then step back out exactly the same way. These had been written as Word documents originally, and so every time these steps were written, they were written slightly differently by different engineers. We were able to agree on one set of processes, again, create a library of topics, a library of steps that could be used to show those individual steps, both in and out. We then moved on to our system manuals, which are our main manuals that our department writes. And we did a lot of manual conversion. And we did this as training for writers on how to take a FrameMaker topic, put it into DITA, and learn the tags and elements and attributes that they were going to need to use. And this really helped them get a hands-on training. And to show you a little bit more about the potential for reuse that we had with our systems. These are two of our systems. The top one is the XI system. The bottom one is the X system. And what you'll notice is that the surgeon cart and the vision cart are identical. The same systems are used, the same carts are used in both systems. The only difference is the patient cart. So we already have 2 out of 3 major components that are described in the manual that are identical. Again, we started with one system, which we created, and then several years later we created the X system. So we just copied and saved the old user manual and started building up from that. But that meant the two started drifting apart. We wanted to bring these back together. And the other thing that's shared is the actual instruments, accessories, and cameras, endoscopes that are used on these systems. So again, another great area for reuse. So one of the first things we did was identify identical or nearly identical content, and then identify what was different. And part of doing that again was once we've identified, especially the nearly identical, is how can we rewrite these so that they are reusable? For example, we had a tendency to use the system name a lot. Thank you for buying a system for a DaVinci Xi system. This Xi system allows you to do blah, 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 blah. There was no reason to keep reminding the user again and again the name of the system. It's printed on every page of the manual. They know what their system is. Once we've taken that system name out, then we have the potential to reuse that topic across multiple systems. And again, just to kind of show you some of the struggles that we were doing with this. Again, this constant writing and rewriting, or starting with an old doc, either the previous version of this manual that we now want a new version of, or an old doc that we want to use as a template for a new doc. Save it as a new file. And then our biggest issue too is with translation. I've written the US English, now I need my OUS English, my English source for translation. So I save a copy of the US book, delete some stuff that's US only, add in some stuff that's specific to the country, and then send the entire book for translation. Once we took this system user manual, which was about 350 pages, we got basically one topic per page. We were able to get about 297 topics in the XDoc, 312 in the XI. But as we started doing the work, we were able to get it to the point where we had 180 shared topics between both. So that meant about 2/3 of the topics and graphics were shared between two docs. We didn't have to rewrite these. We didn't have to retranslate these. So for example, when we sent this out for translation, we sent the X doc first. So 297 docs went out for topics. After those were translated and approved, then we did the XI, but we only had to send about 130 topics. So that right there was a huge cost savings in translation. So now our workflow with DITA. We start with a template book map, or again, we start with the previous version of the book map and version it up. And if we're writing a new document, we can start by saying what's in the CMS already, what topics are out there that we can use as is, or what other topics are out there that are almost usable but might need to be tweaked a little bit. And then what are the new topics, the brand new topics that we're going to have to create, especially for this document. And again, creating our English source for translation is much simpler now. We have a copy of the book map that's country specific, or as needed, or more general if we can have one that covers multiple countries. Now we're using profiling instead of deleting. So we're profiling content in or out as needed. And now when we do translations, we only have to send the updated topics or the new topics. We're not sending the entire book for translation. And finally, we're now publishing in-house. Our translation company is only responsible for translating the content. We do the formatting, we do the style sheets, choose the fonts for our countries, for each country. So we've moved that whole DTP processing in-house. That's also been a huge cost savings for translation. And I apologize if these are a little small, but I just want to kind of give a general feeling for the changes that we've been able to make with styling. One of the things you'll notice on the left is that, for example, the cover has this beautiful gray background that stretches to the edge. We have all of these blue bars on the pages that go off the page, and the page number is highlighted in a blue bar. All of this required overprinting and then cutting down the paper. So this was a huge printing cost. So one of the first things we did was get rid of all of this so that we can print on 8.5 by 11 and be done with it. Or as needed, we could print on A4. We also added doc name, doc title, and part number to each page so that if people printed or copied pages, they would know exactly where documents came from. And also, it's very hard to tell, but in the header top left on this page, we added, you're not seeing my mouse, the far right page, top left corner, we added a breadcrumb that's actually a clickable link. So as customers are receiving PDFs in addition to printed, they can navigate the document much more easily. And just another quick example of the types of changes that we're able to make. With our previous field service docs, all of these yellow highlighted areas are steps that say, go off to this other PDF, find this step, and do these things, and then come back. So the very first step is to go off to another step, go off to another PDF, and do a series of things, and then do one step, and then go off to a second PDF and do some other things, and then do 2 or 3 more things. So the engineers literally had to jump around between several docs in order to finish something. Also, the layout was set up so that these screenshots have the number of the step written in the corner, but they're not really tied to the step. So you keep having to look back left and right to figure out where you are in the doc. With the new layout, each step was in there. So these first 5 steps on the left were all originally in a different document. Now they're in the procedure itself. Each image is tied to the step, so you know exactly what it is. And again, all of these are modules, or library steps. So steps 1 through 5, 1 through 6 on the left are all coming from a library. Steps 7, 8, and beyond are again coming from a library. The only thing that's unique to this procedure is step number 8. Step number, I believe that's 6 in the middle. So the first step on the right page is the only one that's unique to this procedure. So again, we were able to create modules, and these made these huge, but engineers are working with these as PDFs. They're not working with these as printed docs. So they don't care the size. They just want to be able to do a procedure from start to finish. So what did we learn along the way? One of the things I'll always say is keep asking questions. Keep asking lots of questions, because the answers will keep changing as things progress. If you want to go from here to there, you need to know where here is and where there is. And again, those are not static. Where are we now? What docs do we have? How are we structured? What are we going to use? What's our goal? Where are we going? What do we want? What tools do we use? Are the tools that we're using right now still good for our needs? Do we need to re-examine our tools and look at other options? Both major tools and minor tools. If we need to collect screenshots, what's the best way to do that? If we need to convert CAD drawings to line art, what's the best way to do that? So these answers will always keep changing. I am a very detailed-oriented person with a tendency towards ADD. So my problem isn't not seeing the forest for the trees. My problem is not seeing the forest for the pine needles. It's really easy to get stuck on the minor details. Make sure you keep pulling yourself back. What's the bigger picture? Don't think just about the conversion, just about the publishing. What's the entire doc process from start to finish? How is the doc plan created? Who's giving you information? Who's approving the document after you've done it? Who's printing it? Who's distributing it? Make sure that you know your entire process, the entire regulatory process for those of us who work in heavy regulatory related industries. Know your end users, know your stakeholders. And stay on the path. Once you're on it, know what that process is. And something I want to add to this too is with every one of these steps, document, document, document. So some of our real lessons learned. Really be clear on the environment. Make sure that not only do you do the basic user acceptance testing, but that you really play with the system. Build up mock-ups. What do we want the new output to really look like? What is the language? What are the elements that we're going to use? What are the attributes that we're going to be used? Keep those documented. Know what your structure is going to be. Know what your templates are going to be. Identify what the tool can and can't do for you. Every tool that you're going to work with is going to have certain pluses, certain minuses. Know what those are as you're going in and keep track of those. And know who's going to do what. Are you going to have several specialized people, or are you going to have people that need to know a little bit of everything? Do you keep your knowledge wide or deep? And again, document these decisions. Keep writing down what the process is. Keep writing down what your rules are. Keep distributing those. Keep commenting and updating those as you go. In terms of content conversion, there's a lot of different ways that we can do this. I think you need to invest time in the beginning for analysis and for creating a system. Start small. Once you know that the system is working, that you have the basic process down, you have the basic element usage figured out, invest some money in just doing a mass conversion. Get a lot of docs done at once, and then you can start working with them. And that might require additional resources. Figure out how that's going to happen. And the other thing, again, play. You have this brand new toy, play with it. Build it, test it, break it, rebuild it, break it again. The only way you'll figure things out is by making mistakes, correcting those mistakes, and doing it over again. You make some decisions about which elements to use, and you realize, ooh, wait, we got way too specialized with that. For example, in DITA, there are 17 different elements that we can use for tagging code. We can tag options and attributes. We can do system diagrams. If you're writing API manuals, maybe you need that. If you're not, you probably don't. You can probably get away with using code phrase and code block, and that's all you need. So play with it and see what happens. Play with sharing, using conref, conkeyref, using variables. Play with these different systems because it really makes a difference. Play with profiling because it's going to get confusing. If you have a paragraph that's for US only and another paragraph that's for outside of the US, except wait a minute, now Japan comes along and they want something completely different. And China wants a combination of what the OUS is and what Japan is. Figure out how your profiling is going to work with that. And again, this depends on your environment. For us, translation is huge. We do over 20 languages. And so work with your translation vendors, practice translation. Don't send them just a paragraph for translation. Send them an entire book, even if it's two or 3 or 5 pages. But make sure your translation vendor can really work with your process. Make sure you know your process. And make sure that your style sheet can handle all 20-odd languages. Can it handle Cyrillic? Can it handle East Asian languages? Can it handle right to left if you need that? So play with translation. And our last slide or two, as we're getting down to the wire on time here, realizing results. And, again, especially because of translation, we've had this huge reduction in cost because of being able to to bring DTP in, to reduce the amount of content that we're actually translating. We're also increasing writer efficiencies and making it much easier to work with this information. I think we're also getting documents that are more and more usable for end users. We're seeing more collaboration within the organization among departments as we start doing this. And finally, we're getting ready for the future. Someday, ideally, I would love a system where every medical device has a UDI, a unique identifier on it. If that could be scanned in and a mobile app could bring up the documentation for that object. Onboard systems, onboard help, and again, reuse across the organization. How can training reuse this? How can marketing reuse this? So a lot going on, but we're down to our last couple minutes. So Scott, if there's anything else you want to throw in, otherwise we can open it up for Q&A.
No, I think questions are welcome. So I'm good.
Thanks,
Perfect.
Joe and Scott. So yeah, go ahead and type in your questions. If we don't get to them, we will get to them offline. So I do get a report. Just one question here. How do you determine what content your team will reuse?
I think it takes kind of a team effort to figure that out. I think there's some things that are more obvious than others. Again, in our environment, it was easy to take a look at two manuals that had originally been based on one another and had drifted. I think some of it comes down to the writers on different projects sitting down and saying what is reusable. Some of it is taking a look at what's inherent. For example, we have a lot of warnings and cautions that get put into the documents and that are the wording on which is defined by regulatory. So some of that is easy to take a look at and say, okay, this is boilerplate content. We know that this same type of thing is going to be coming up again and again.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, the other thing I was just going to add is there's that specific reuse, but then there's also reuse of language. Teaching writers, helping writers determine and implement a writing style. Hopefully something that's more of a global English writing, something that's easier for translation and more accessible to non-native readers. So that every time we say, for more information, see page 7. For more details, see 7. If you would like to learn more about blah, 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 or C7 for blah, 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 find that specific language that writers can agree on, which in the end will create content that is more reusable.
Okay, and let's just do one more question. Well, it's kind of a 3-part question. It says, how do you handle your graphics? Do you include GUIs and do you translate GUIs?
Great questions. So, possible. Really hard to see, but counting from the left,
okay, you're kind of breaking
frame.
up. Yeah, I can't quite hear you. You're breaking up quite a bit. So maybe we'll just go ahead and get to this question offline, unfortunately.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it is a little bit better. Maybe you want to just try finishing real quick.
Yeah. So graphic on the the third graphic, callouts with text. The last graphic on the right, we now have numbered callouts. So we no longer need to get that graphic translated. The callouts are in a numbered list below the graphic, so that can be part of the XML translation. And the second part of that question, graphic or UI, yes, we do translate our system into about 10 languages. And so, yeah, we did have to upload translations for those languages, or translated screenshots for those languages. But those are profiled, essentially the profiled images for that language. That also is an issue for translation because in those languages, the buttons have to match the translation in the text. In the non-translated languages where we use the English, we would use the English name of the button and then have a description, a translated description in parentheses after it. So, yeah, and that is a challenge, making sure that those are right.
Okay,